Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to tonight's second half. Before we jump into tonight's second half, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they really do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first terrifying experience. This is an experience I had years ago with my retired biologist, conservation officer, wildlife, and land management grandfather, high in the Uinta Mountains. I'd like to give as much detail and specifics on my experience. Let me first clarify that this was 4 years ago, when I was 15 on a muzzleloader's mule deer hunt in the far northeastern part of Utah, which contains some of the most remote and beautiful place in the state. I've been frequently out in this area, spreading in the Summit County, that cuts in and out of lower Wyoming since before I can remember, including lots of hiking, backpacking, camping, hunting, and being involved in some of my grandfather's work. I am skeptical of things not proven by methods of science, but I don't deny all of those things. I find that it's impossible for science to know of all that is out in our vast world. My grandfather, a recent retired biologist and former conservation officer for the state of Utah, and was a regional specialist over wildlife and habitat management for many years. He's done everything from habitat management programs, controlled fires to benefit areas, to quite literally wrangling moose to be transplanted and darting black bear. He has seen mountain lion, bear, birds of all kinds, small mammals, plants, and natural phenomena for the majority of his life. He understands so much that many people, including myself, will never even be able to imagine. He's scientific, honest, straightforward, level-headed. He's an agnostic. He's not superstitious, and often used to, lovingly and respectfully, tease a certain CO who thinks certain Bigfoot, Dogman, and other beings exist. Other than this experience, he has never encountered an animal that he could not at least partially, if not completely, identify. And other than the natural innate fear of being in close quarters with a bear, drunk and belligerent hunter, or incredibly potent tranquilizer medication, he has told me over and over he has never been terrified of an animal or an experience like this, only curious or surprised. It was late September, and we were in a small camp by a lake in the high Uinta Mountains, hunting both grouse and mule deer with muzzle loaders. The camp was a small collection of men and women my grandfather had worked with over the years as a supervisor, biologist, CO, and these were people I grew up with. One of the women, a new wife to one of the guys, had shot a buck deer, injuring but not killing it immediately, and they had lost track of it. Devastated by the thought of wasting the animal, she returned to camp in the afternoon upset and concerned that the deer had run into an even more secluded area of the mountain, which was hard to reach from the trail that she had shot it from, a place my grandfather was familiar with because it's such a pain in the ass to get to, with lots of deadfall and steep terrain. We volunteered to go in the late afternoon to search for the deer, following a scant blood trail that she had tracked for a while before getting fatigued and intimidated by the terrain, because both my grandfather and I were in fairly good shape, and he was so familiar. It didn't seem like a big deal. Before we left, she had mentioned hearing what she assumed were coyotes, which made her even more concerned that if the deer died, they would ruin the meat and hide before she could even harvest it. We took off in the early evening, expecting to be back within an hour or two after searching and having our guns with us, in case we found the animal still alive or came across another buck worth trying to harvest. It was steep in places, with lots and lots of deadfall of varying heights, making the hike slower and more tedious than we had hoped, making us understand the other hunters' fatigue. She had marked the blood trail with bright orange pieces on the trees, which we followed for maybe 20 minutes, and then it got hard to track. The sun was getting close to setting at this point, and we knew getting out would be just as long as getting in. We had just about decided to stop when we found a spot near a fallen tree that looked like it had been recently bedded down in, followed by splatters of fairly fresh blood, and we continued for longer. When the sun had just about set and the light had faded from the trees, we removed the firing caps from our guns to make them now completely safe, as it's now illegal and irresponsible to hunt in such absence of decent light. My grandfather pulled out his large Maglite flashlight from his pack, and I put my headlamp on to begin our hike back, using our GPS to find the trailhead. About 10 minutes on the way back, we started to hear more movement among the trees. It was normal for animals to start moving now that the sun had gone down, as animals would likely be starting to head towards clearings for water or to graze in the safety of low light. Small and distant sounds of crunching leaves, pattering of hooved animals, or small bits of movement in the trees from squirrels or birds were common and expected. We did not expect the deafening, disturbing sound we heard next, which vaguely and intently reminded me of a coyote howl, but by a few seconds it was unidentifiable, frightening and human-like. It started with what sounded like a person screaming and then got louder and more intense, with a screech to it, so unlike a coyote or any other animal we had ever heard. Then was the almost chittering that came in between the shrieks, and the movement of the trees became almost calculated, almost threatening. We stopped dead in our tracks, frozen, as my grandfather started using his light to look around. I was far more freaked out than he was at this point. He just seemed perplexed, curious, a bit baffled at what could be making the sound. It sounded human, but with no words, with no urge of tone of help or "I'm just screaming to mess with you." And we continued on. After it mostly stopped and seemed like the other natural and distant sounds had gone almost silent, I listened intently to the sound of my boots crunching with the dry aspen leaves underfoot, trying to tell myself that it was just some weird coyote with a horribly deformed larynx or something like that. Maybe 20 minutes after the main trail that would lead us to the truck, we heard the chattering sound again, and sounds of thumping against dead leaves. Looking around with our lights, in between deadfall, maybe 12 to 15 feet in front of us, was a large, human-looking thing. It was almost hunched down, with long, slender arms around the front of a standing aspen. The aspen, of course, was pale white, with the knots being dark brown, and whatever it was had skin almost as pale. I caught a very brief glimpse of its face. It seemed round, and the eyes seemed sunken, and I could not tell you the eye color other than a flash reflection of the eye from my light, and that its face seemed sunken and emaciated. I did not see fur or hear. I never felt like it looked right at me, more my grandfather, and just in our direction, almost confused and curious, like he was before with the sound. For a mere couple of seconds I caught a glimpse of it, but that was it. I looked down at the ground, holding my eyes shut tight, trying to imagine being safe and secure in the truck. And my grandfather took a few stumbling steps backward toward me. I heard the thing go off to our side, moving quickly, with purpose through the trees to the side, and then dropped down behind us. I would assume according to the sound, but I hope it went in the opposite direction. My grandfather turned to where it had veered off, as to follow it, but he soon stopped to look at me. I had never before and never since seen him so confused, baffled, horrified, curious, and in awe. I was crying at this point, ugly crying, trying to muffle my shaking breath and voice, and I asked him, what was that? Over and over I asked, and he had no answer for me. He pulled his gun off his shoulder sling and put the cap back on the nipple of the igniter, making the gun live. And then he carried it in front of his body in his arms. He pulled out another headlamp and put it on himself. We were starting to walk again toward the trail as he listed off, talking to himself as to what it wasn't. Things like couldn't have been a deer or an elk or a moose. It had arms. It was hunched. It stood upright. Or a bear. Very sick bear. It couldn't have been a bear. Was it the light? We heard the sound, the screeching human howl, distant once more before reaching the trail, which was dirt and gravel, but fairly flat, and no deadfall. We practically jogged back to the truck. I locked the doors immediately and sobbed, and my grandfather turned on the music as loud as possible to try to distract me on the way back to camp. I was a mess when we arrived back at camp, and he went to talk with the others by the fire when he got me settled in my sleeping bag in the bunk. He explained some to his friends, but I don't know all what was said. The next day, everyone was extra sweet to me, trying to comfort me and saying it was probably a sick animal that looked scary in the dark. The deer the hunter shot was found the next day in the daylight, scavenged quite harshly by what I assume coyotes. To this day, my grandfather has no clue what that was, nor what that sound was. And before and since, I've heard both coyote and many other animal sounds that never even compared to it. The scientist in me and in him, the hopeful and blissfully ignorant people in us, hope to speculate it was just a deformed, sick animal in scant light, but I still have no clue of what that thing was, and I hope I never ever experience it again. Today's second experience. I know how crazy this is going to sound. I live in rural Kentucky, but I work in Lexington. I was driving home from work at around dusk, just a few miles from home, when my son calls and says, Dad, there's something attacking the house. And in the background I hear a loud, deep rumbling noise as if the house is being pelted with rocks, and a sound I can only describe as a deeper version of Godzilla's roar. All of my paternal instincts kick in, and I say, Get my shotgun, you remember how to use it, right? He says, yes. I ask him if he has called my husband, and he says, yeah, but he's further away than I am. I said, okay, I'll be there as fast as I can, but once I get there, turn on the searchlights all around the house. And I sped my Jeep as fast as I could. For this next part, it's important to know I keep myself pretty armed, as I was mugged a few years back, and I don't feel safe without weapons. I have a Thompson gun, my weapon of choice for almost any situation, in my car, and a .45 and a 6-inch knife on me at all times. By the time I get there, it's dark. The lights pop on, and I see something tall brown dash out of the light. I slam the brakes and almost go through my garage. I grab my Thompson gun and practically sprint out of my car and fire roughly 15 rounds into the air. I scream, "Come out, you effing coward." I know this was a stupid thing to do, but there was so much adrenaline pumping through me I could barely feel my hands. Silence for 15 seconds, then out of the corner of my eye I see something rush me from the right. I spin around, firing 6 shots, obliterating my mailbox. It scared off whatever was, as the rounds were inches away from hitting it. I see a 7-foot-tall shape disappear into the tree line. I make a beeline for my front door, go inside, and comfort my son. I will never forget the look of fear on his face. 45 minutes later, my husband arrives, tears in his face, and practically doesn't let go of our son for 20 minutes. The whole time I'm on edge looking out the windows. My son asked to sleep in our room, so I set a cot for him to sleep on. I didn't sleep the entire night. I just stared out of the window waiting. I crashed at dawn and just woke up. My husband was still clinging to my son, and my son seems pretty shook about the whole situation. I told my sister about this, and she said it was probably just a prank, some teenagers, and I shouldn't have done what I did. I know what I saw. The creature was 7 foot tall, had a chest like a bodybuilder, but long, toned legs and arms like an Olympic sprinter. It was covered in brown fur. I have now decided to put a fence around our house and possibly electrify it. We are going to stay in that state of Kentucky for today's third terrifying experience. Let's all remember that Kentucky is in that hot spot, that hot zone that I call North Carolina, West Virginia, Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky. For some reason, it's been a hot spot for a very long time. Within the last couple of years, it's been a very, very big hot spot, though. Not saying that any other location in America is not, but I'm just saying for some reason this area has more activity. I was black powder hunting alone in an area far removed from civilization as we know it. An off-grid property with old-growth timber surrounding it for many miles in every direction, with just a few seasonal hunting cabins that lie dormant most of the year. I've deer hunted this property all my life, and had never had any reason to fear walking into the deer stand in the dark, until the 2008 season changed my life forever. I always rode my four-wheeler in and parked 250 yards outside of my favorite spot, and walked the rest of the way in, to not spook any of the game before I got up into my stand. So as I shut my four-wheeler off, and I put on my pack, I heard a very large limb snap, and thought it was a deer or an animal moving around maybe 20 yards away. So I really don't think much about it. I just figured I had spooked an animal inside the woods, so I gathered my gun and hunting stuff and started walking down a 2-track trail without my flashlight on, due to having good enough light from the moon to see where I was walking. I hunted here a long time and pretty much know the trail. This trail ended in a 15-acre hayfield surrounded by old-growth timber. As I walked in the dark, I started to realize something was paralleling my every step just inside the woods. I walked and stopped. It would do the same. And as I moved along the dark trail, the footsteps started getting closer to me. I wasn't sure, but it sounded like it was bipedal. By the time I realized I had a serious situation on my hands, it was too far and too late to make it back to the four-wheeler safely, so I picked up my pace and made a beeline for the field. I got to the field with my stalker pacing my every step. I moved swiftly toward my stand 75 yards down the edge of the woods. When I got within 10 yards from the stand, I heard another large limb snap, very close to the edge of the field to my left. I stopped, turned my flashlight on, and shined it in the direction. I saw 2 glowing green eyes about 10 inches apart. Instinctively, I raised my hands in the air and yelled, "Get out of here!" I stomped my foot, not really sure what I was seeing. It just blinks its eyes once and never moves. I couldn't make out any other details, just that it may have been crouched, due to the proximity of the eyes to the ground. When whatever this was didn't run like a non-predatory animal would do, I realized in an instant the best thing to do was take higher ground and get to the stand as quickly as possible. This, whatever it was no more than 8 steps away, and if I had shot it in the dark, I would have been blinded by the muzzle flash, and it might attack if I missed. And with only one shot, I knew I'd be in trouble if it did attack. I climbed up my ladder like a squirrel. I watched, listened, and waited for what seemed like an eternity for daybreak. This thing circled my stand, just out of reach of my flashlight, for over an hour. I'm not ashamed to admit, I was scared, but I remained calm and knew the only way it could get to me was the ladder, and I felt comfort in knowing that it would have to climb up the ladder to get me. At one point in the dark, I heard what sounded like a small rock bounce off the lower end of the metal ladder. I waited with my gun at ready, and I would have done whatever it would have taken to stay alive, and wasn't going out without a fight. I could see a shadow moving, but in the dark you never know if your eyes are playing tricks on you, but I could sense a real threat lurking in the dark field surrounding my deer stand. For whatever reason, this thing was stalking me, and did so until just a few seconds before daybreak. I heard its footsteps fade into the woods where it had followed me from. I waited, watched, and listened intently until full daylight, and descended cautiously down the ladder on high alert. As I walked back to my four-wheeler, I knew this thing was not gone but hiding inside the forest, watching my every move. I moved across the field quickly and waited and listened before heading down the 2 tracks, surrounded by both sides with trees, because I knew this would be the perfect ambush spot with close quarters and not much room to evade or fight off an attack. I unsnapped my hunting knife sheath, got a firm grip on my black powder rifle, and went for broke, ready for battle of life and death. As I rounded the corner where my four-wheeler was sitting, I saw my escape and wasted no time jumping on the machine. As I turned the key and reached to hit the start button, I heard another branch or limb snap with great force somewhere behind me. The bike fired up, and I gasped the throttle hard, going through the gears as fast as I could, never looking back. To be honest, I didn't want to know what it was, and just was relieved that I had escaped a close call. I got back to the cabin, packed up, and left the area. Went back home and cut the week-long hunt short. Didn't return until the following spring. I've often thought about this experience, and since I realized the days leading up to it, I didn't see any wildlife at all. The forest was eerily quiet, no animal activity at all. What it was, you ask? Bigfoot, Dogman, some other sort of cryptid? I don't know, but I do know I experienced it, and have never been the same when I enter the woods since. I've changed my hunting tactics, how and when I enter the woods, and I always carry a backup sidearm, and I tune into what the creatures in the woods are telling me first and foremost. If the squirrels and birds are not moving around normally, there is a predator in their midst, and it just might be hunting you as well. Solid advice right there. Obviously a seasoned hunter, very comfortable in his location, goes out with his black powder rifle and a hunting knife, but is stalked by, who knows, Dogman, Bigfoot. Kentucky, I'm leaning towards Dogman. And after this experience that he escaped narrowly, was smart about it. You know, he didn't change his tactics. Most people would just give up hunting. I've known many people that have had these experiences that have hunted all their entire lives, never saw anything, and have one experience and are done completely. And I respect that. But this guy didn't. He changed his whole tactics about hunting, always having a second backup sidearm. But listening to nature is the key, man. It's just the key. I sound like Biden right there, man. Anyway, definitely, if you're in the woods, you're hiking, you're doing something, always have some sort of protection with you. If you live in a state where you can't carry a firearm, carry a knife with you, carry some bear spray, just something that you can rely on that is stronger and more deadly than your fist, to protect yourself. So definitely a terrifying experience, but definitely a learning experience as well. All right, we are going to end tonight's second half with an experience from my neck of the woods. I've been interested in cryptids for a while now. I'm a hopeful skeptic, but I had something happen while camping that I feel like I should be able to explain. Anyway, a while ago I had broke my arm. Stupid accident. I sat on my ass and watched a lot of Netflix for 2 or 3 months. Well, a good friend of mine had called me and asked if I was up for an overnight camping trip to our favorite spot, just inside the Adirondack State Park, west and south of the town of Wells, New York. Of course I was. We got everything ready, food, water, whatnot. I left my house at around 6 p.m. We just wanted to make a fire, have some dinner, shoot the breeze, and relax, do some hiking the next day, and go home. We got there a couple hours before dusk, set up the camp. My friend hasn't camped since he was a preteen, whereas I've camped my entire life. We're both in our early 40s. The place was almost deserted. There was a family with a camper almost a mile away from us. This is actually a trailhead with campsites littered along an 8-mile dirt road. We did that we intended for the night. My friend slept in his car. I set up my hammock about 30 yards away, 5 or 6 feet from the fire pit. At around midnight, and a lot of people said no, I wasn't drunk or on drugs. We had both had some alcohol. I like to drink, but not excessively while camping. I'm there to enjoy nature, not get screwed up. I can do that at home. I was awoken at around 3 in the morning to a noise of my friend's car door slamming. I peer over and his dome light's on, and he seems to be looking for something. The dome light goes off, but now I'm awake. I keep peering over, and a few minutes later the flashlight on his phone is on, and it looks like he's shining it out the window, still looking. What is going on, I think? Did he hear something? Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep easily. I was fairly certain I could hear coyotes yipping and fighting in the distance. At around 4 in the morning, I thought I heard a loud noise. We were camping right next to the river, and the noise sounded like a whoomph, like a giant clearing its throat. But from the other side of the river, it was pitch black out there, and I started to feel uneasy. I kept peering over to my friend. The sun is set to rise in about an hour, and I heard scratching, a digging noise. Peeking over again, I thought I saw a shadow near my friend's car. I took out my phone and just opened the main screen instead of the flashlight. There were 2 distinct pairs of eye shine to the right of his car, a yellowish white and low, maybe 1 to 2 feet off the ground. I was scared, in a place I loved since I was a teen, a place I've always felt safe. Then the left pair started moving in kind of a circular motion. I was already pretty freaked out. I want to say I felt a presence, but all I felt was scared for my friend and scared for myself. I turned on my flashlight, forgetting that it was pointed at me, and momentarily blinded myself. I caught a vague glimpse of 2 smallish animal things vanishing. Then, still looking at my friend's car, still feeling that same dread, I hear from behind me, "Oomph!" It was a soft, but so deep it rattled my chest, then nothing. I didn't turn around. I was too afraid. I may have gotten 2 hours of sleep that night. I had a bad dream a few hours that I did sleep. In the morning, my friend and I had some food. I asked him what he was doing at around 3 or 4. Oh, I woke up and I thought I lost my wallet. So you didn't hear or see anything? No, I couldn't even hear the river. My friend has really bad tendonitis, so I let it go. We went on a 5 to 7 mile hike. I got to show him some of my favorite spots. We saw a lot of amazing scenery, talked a lot, and hiked by ourselves. On the way back to the car, maybe an hour left, I heard a knock far away, but it sounded loud. Like I said, the only people we had seen was that family in the trailer. I was in front and stopped. Did you just hear that? Hear what? That was a knock. I didn't hear anything. The rest of the hike passed uneventfully, save for both of us complaining about the mosquitoes. I told him about the eye shine I saw next to his car, and we both rationalized it as a pair of raccoons or something. I didn't see any point of telling him the rest. I'm not sure what to believe about myself. It happened after a glass of whiskey and very little sleep. But just as we were leaving, that tree knock, that makes me wonder. And that, folks, was tonight's second half. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect we all deserve. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, friends. These creatures are real. They are out there, and they are definitely dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.